Stuff happens in gaming repeatedly that we just see over and over again. It gets popular, or it just happens a lot, and some of it really sucks. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 7 gaming trends from 2022 that need to die. Last year we did a list of this. We talked about high GPU prices, server issues, scalpers, poor to outright bad remasters, and particularly unfinished games. So let's get started with number 7, game delays. Now, if the video game industry could be summed up by one word in 2022, it's gotta be delayed. So many games got delayed last year, it's almost hard to believe. Basically, every major release in 2023 that we know about anyway was supposed to come out in 2022, but got delayed at some point, which is crazy. Like, remember when Starfield was gonna come out 11/11/22? That didn't happen. Suicide Squad, Stalker 2, Forspoken, Diablo 4, Redfall, all this stuff was meant to come out last year but got pushed back for various reasons. Even Nintendo wasn't immune to it. The long-awaited Breath of the Wild follow-up was going to come out last year too, but that didn't happen. 2022 was the year that was meant to be when Skull and Bones finally dropped. It was finally supposed to come out, but it didn't happen. That game was originally going to come out in October 2019. And then it got pushed to the 2021-2022 fiscal year. In July, Ubisoft finally gave a solid release date, November 8th, 2022. Seemed surefire. That was the first time they really ever did that. But no, that got pushed back again. Like, this is a game that could be good, but like, because of this, it's hard to get really high hopes for, because you only ever really hear about its troubled production and maybe a few random jokes at its expense. But fingers crossed that it actually comes out for real this time. I think it could very well, like I said, be a very good game, but I kind of just want, like, to say that it's a real game. Now, the delays are at least understandable. Last year, we were still dealing with the fallout from the pandemic, and that hurt productivity across basically every single industry. But the video game industry really struggled to deal with COVID-related issues, and it kind of compounded and all happened last year. Now, delays suck, but at the end of the day, if we get a better game because of it, I'm more for the delay than releasing the unfinished game. But I'm just gonna say this: don't say you're gonna release a game that you don't think you can have 100% finished in good quality at the time you're claiming you're gonna release the game. Is it that hard to understand this one? And number 6, studio acquisitions and mergers. It seems like every week in 2022, we heard about a new acquisition happening. For whatever reason, 2022 was the year big names in gaming like Sony and Microsoft decided to go all in on consolidation. Seems like everybody was buying everyone else. There are all these crazy stories about buyouts that previously seemed completely impossible, but now anything seems possible. Anyone could buy anyone else. The ominously named Embracer Group scooped up any devs they could get their hands on in 2022, and they've become one of the biggest game companies of all time. Seriously, they have over 10,000 employees now. In 2022, their most high-profile acquisition was Square Enix's Western properties and developers, which gave them rights to major series like Deus Ex and Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider! A lot of people thought Square Enix had mismanaged the Western studios, so saw the acquisition as a positive, especially because it happened around the time Square Enix was talking about getting into the NFT market. But nobody can really say for certain how popular studios like Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal are going to do under new management. That said, yeah, I think it could probably be a net positive. Hopefully, anyways. Another major story happened near the beginning of the year with Take-Two buying the mobile game company Zynga for a massive $12.7 billion. At the time, this was by far the biggest deal in gaming history, but the year was just getting started. A month later, Microsoft announced easily the biggest acquisition of all time. They're planning on buying Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion, which would give Microsoft and Xbox control over major franchises like Diablo, Overwatch, and Call of Duty. Remember, in 2021, Microsoft scooped up Bethesda. It was like a $7 billion thing, and it was like, wow, they bought Bethesda. But, I mean, that was nothing compared to this. This story basically dominated gaming news most of last year, and it's probably going to continue to this year. When Sony bought up Destiny and Halo developer Bungie for $3 $1.6 billion, it almost seemed quaint. But it's just another way that it feels like the games industry is getting smaller while also getting bigger. You got these huge publishers consolidating, and that's good for services like Xbox Game Pass because it means more free games. But it's also a little concerning. Like, pretty much all of the entertainment choices seem like they're being consolidated into like 2 or 3 companies. And right now it's impossible to say exactly what effect all these buyouts and acquisitions are really gonna have. But 2022 saw some of the biggest moves yet, and by yet I mean of all time. And it's kind of scary imagining things going further with a few mega companies having a stranglehold on the entire gaming market. I'm not sure if that's how things are gonna shake out, but yeah. I mean, who even knows if that would negatively affect the quality of the games or not, but it's kind of weird and troubling either way. At number 5, 2 years later, we're still in the last gen. In 2020, we finally got our hands on the next generation of consoles, the Xbox Series and the PlayStation 5, 2 days apart. What was supposed to be this big generational shift, though, never really materialized, and it's 2 years later, and we're still mostly playing cross-platform games. Almost every major release this year was cross-platform. Horizon, God of War, Elden Ring, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Dying Light 2, Callisto Protocol. Basically, if you can name it, and it wasn't a Nintendo exclusive, it was probably cross-platform. Only a few games managed to come out this year that were next-gen exclusive, like Ghostwire Tokyo and A Plague Tale Requiem. The only major Sony exclusive that was PS5 only was Last of Us Part 1, and that game's been remade for PlayStation 4 and was originally on a PlayStation 3. We've seen it. It looks beautiful now compared to how it used to, but we've seen it before. There really were some amazing looking games in 2022, and even some of the ones I mentioned that are cross-platform, the next-gen version does look significantly better. But they're not reaching their full potential if they're developing simultaneously for the last gen and this one. Like, the last generation of hardware is almost 10 years old, so if you're developing simultaneously for both, I mean, the game's not gonna really feel next gen, even if the next gen version looks a lot better. Callisto Protocol comes to mind. Now, there is obviously a reason why a lot of these games are cross-platform. Console shortages were a huge problem throughout 2021 and 2, so these developers wanted to make it so more people could play their games, and that's an admirable goal. But it was a bummer for everybody who dropped $500 plus on release day for a next-gen system, and we see like game demos like that Nanite one for Unreal Engine, and we're thinking, wow, this is what the next gen is gonna look like. And it's 2 years too late at this point, but it does look at least like 2023 is going to be when we see much more exclusives for the PS5 and Xbox Series, and when they maybe be able to actually officially call this the next gen for real. And number 4 is characters who will not shut up. 2022 was the year of the blabbermouth, characters narrating over everything. I mean, it's always been one of those minor annoyances that we've seen in gaming through the years, but this is the year where a lot of gamers started to get fed up with it. First game of 2022, where the amount of talking got on people's nerves, I think was Horizon Forbidden West. The main character just talks through everything, absolutely everything, no matter how mundane it is. It was kind of impressive how she'd remember if you'd been somewhere before or mention if an area is completed. But when the game starts solving puzzles for you, that's when the talking goes from intrusive, but maybe acceptable, to kind of infuriating. This one's more of a personal thing. Some people won't even register the amount of character dialogue, while for other people it's like nails on a chalkboard. God of War Ragnarok kind of ran into similar troubles, with characters constantly telling you where to go and what to do in such a way that was distracting rather than helpful. Like, everyone loves Mimir, but he did really not need to remind Kratos that he's on fire every time. He didn't. Most of these games at least give an option to turn down the frequency of the dialogue, but for a lot of people, the damage was done. High on Life. Great game. I was favorable towards it, although I had minor complaints about how it would have been nice if they just knew when to edit a little bit. It was thankfully one of those games where you could turn down the frequency. And a lot of the time, it's an extreme level of hand-holding. And it was especially odd because one of the year's most popular games, Elden Ring, just had no hand-holding. And that's not to say Elden Ring is superior to those games. These are great games we're talking about. Just the frequency of the talking was probably overtuned. That's not even mentioning games like Xenoblade Chronicles or Tiny Tina's Wonderland. High on Life had its charm to it that those games kind of, I don't know, didn't. Like, I wasn't laughing during Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and Tiny Tina's Wonderland, while funny, isn't as funny as High on Life. Like, all these games, though, they can just be a cacophony of noise at the worst moments. 2022 wasn't the year that invented this, but it was the year where people started to get sick of it. And number 3 is the Nintendo Switch's big performance problem. Yeah, tough year for the little hybrid Nintendo. Also one of the system's best. Like, just talking about games, 2022 was one of the all-time best years for the system. There's really a lot of fantastic exclusives, but the performance issues of the hardware stopped being a minor annoyance and started being a big problem. Wasn't just little indie games, third-party titles that had rough frame rates and visuals. First-party titles are now struggling too, like Fire Emblem Three Hopes, Pokemon Legends Arceus, and especially Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I don't know if we'd even be talking about this as much if Scarlet and Violet looked like Arceus, which is, like I said, a problem, but not the kind of problem those games are. And it really brought attention to this issue. The newest entry in the main Pokemon series really had a hard time at release. There was constant pop-in, there's ugly textures, low resolution visuals, and bad frame rates. And there's still a lot of technical issues the game struggles with. The performance was so bad, people were legitimately worried about the new Legend of Zelda game. Personally, I'm not too worried about that one because Xenoblade 3 looked really good. And if anyone is capable of working magic from the Switch hardware, it's the Breath of the Wild team. But also keep in mind, sometimes Breath of the Wild dips a fair amount in frame rate too, and that game's from 2017. And while there are games that work well and look fine, there's a lot of other games that are just plain rough. Sonic Frontiers, very inconsistent frame rate. Blade Runner Enhanced Edition port was a disaster. Lego Brawls got really bad reviews for performance. We need a Switch 2, I think. Part of owning a Switch at this point is accepting lower frame rates and less impressive graphics. But in 2022, some Switch games just barely seem to work. Like Tears of the Kingdom, really hoping that isn't a problem with it. Also, when they do announce a Switch 2, it's gonna have to have backwards compatibility. I don't see them wanting to put one out without it. Or I don't know, maybe Switch Pro. I don't know. Tears of the Kingdom be good. Switch Pro, Switch 2 soon. Please. All of this. And number 2 is price increases. Normally, as gaming hardware evolves and production techniques become more common, the prices of things like hardware are supposed to go down. But in 2022, we saw a lot of unprecedented price increases. 2 years later, you'd expect to see some kind of discount on the price of a PlayStation 5, but it's actually more expensive in certain international markets. PlayStation blames inflation and recession concerns for the price, but it still sucks that there are people that were forced to wait 2 years because of shortages, and it just not going down in price at all. Another piece of hardware that got more expensive was the Meta Quest 2 Meta VR headset. The price jumped $100, with the basic model's price going from $299 to $399. Like PlayStation, it's supposedly production and shipping costs, but yeah, it wasn't just hardware that saw price increases either. Steam games in certain regions also saw increased prices, sometimes by like 100 times the original amount. This is partially because Valve's new price calculator estimates what developers should charge for games per region. It's just an estimate and devs don't have to use it, but a lot of them did, and certain games really ballooned in price. I know Steam's trying to crack down on people taking advantage of prices being a lot lower in certain regions, but some of these prices are just ridiculous. It's bad enough pretty much everything costs more now, but at least let us buy games at a reasonable price. And finally, at number 1, NFTs in gaming. If there's one gaming trend that should definitely die in 2023, it's NFTs in games. If you don't know what an NFT is, good for you. The basics is that NFT stands for non-fungible token, which is an unique digital identifier that's recorded on a blockchain and used to identify ownership. What this has to do with games is that you can attach NFTs to pictures or in-game objects, which is supposed to make them unique, which gives them value, allegedly. The NFT is unique, but the picture or in-game item they're connected to isn't. So it's a whole weird thing. There's 50-minute YouTube videos that can explain this better than I can, but the main takeaway here is that NFTs are kind of another way to add in monetization, like worse DLC. The major selling point is that NFTs give players complete ownership of what they buy. Because it's on the blockchain, it can't be duplicated, and you could potentially take an item you buy in one game and transfer it to another game, perhaps. In practice, that doesn't work, because you're basically buying the receipt, not the item itself, and if developers want to make make it so you can use stuff you can buy in another game. Sure, yeah, but they'd have to implement that, like in code themselves. It's not something that just happened because of the blockchain. It has to be programmed. The assets have to be in both games, yada yada. So you run into issues like, why would developer of game A want to waste their time making some item for game B in game A, especially when they're not going to make money from it? The whole thing feels like a bunch of empty promises from people who have a vested interest in seeing NFTs succeed, and not because they're actually something people want. You ever hear the skin crawling phrase, play to earn? Those are primarily NFT games. In 2022, it seems like investors saw dollar signs and went NFT crazy, thinking this was the way to make video games basically print money for them. Like Ubisoft jumped into the NFT market full force with Quartz, where you could buy unique Ghost Recon guns for real world cash. The whole thing backfired because nobody bought them. Because why? Why would we want them? And while the website's still there, it remains in beta and it's mostly abandoned. Square Enix president Yosuke Matsuda, he's all in on NFTs. All he talked about last year was plans to adapt NFT craft to popular franchises, and no one wants it, but this man is like, I want it. But there's one big problem. In 2022, the NFT market completely collapsed. The Wall Street Journal reported the NFT token sales had declined by 92%, and the number of active wallets had dropped by 88% in the previous year. Combine that with the overall crash of the crypto market and the miserable decline of the crypto bank FTX and its founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, who's currently facing multiple counts of fraud, and things are not looking so hot for NFT games. Square Enix is still pretending like they're all about NFTs, but we'll see how long that lasts. Hopefully not long. Back in early 2022, it seemed like NFTs were going to be inescapable, but it does seem like they're kind of a forgotten footnote going into 2023, thankfully. Just a thing that dominated the news for a while and disappeared just as quickly. Good riddance, right? That's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.